The night I learned I was no longer part of my own family happened in a ballroom full of white roses and polite applause. I was standing at the edge of my parents' Christmas charity gala, holding a glass of champagne I hadn't touched, when my father announced a decision that erased me from the room. Before I take you any further, pause for just a second. If you've ever felt invisible inside your own family, like the room went quiet the moment you needed it to speak, tap like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from tonight. Not because you owe me anything, because stories like this don't survive unless someone stays to hear them. Now let me tell you how it actually began. My name is Claire Holloway. I was 32 years old that winter, old enough to know how families work, and old enough to know when something has been wrong for a long time. My parents, Robert and Elaine Holloway, had built their reputation carefully over decades. They owned Holloway Maritime Logistics, a regional shipping company based out of Savannah, Georgia, with contracts stretching from Charleston to Houston. To the outside world, they were generous, disciplined, respectable. Church donors, board members, the kind of couple people trusted without asking questions. Inside our family, trust worked differently. I was the eldest child, the responsible one, the quiet achiever. My younger sister, Madeline Holloway, was the opposite. Loud, charming, adored. If I brought home a perfect report card, my mother nodded and asked if I'd eaten. When Madeline forgot to graduate on time, my parents blamed the school. I learned early which role I had been assigned. By 32, I was the director of compliance at a mid-sized freight insurance firm in Atlanta, managing regulatory audits across 4 states, overseeing a team of 12, and signing off on policies worth millions. I paid my own mortgage, my own health insurance, my own pride. None of that mattered to my parents. To them, I was still the difficult daughter, the one who asked questions, the one who didn't smile on cue. The gala that night was held at the Riverfront Grand Hotel, a place my mother loved because it looked expensive without being obvious. White linens, crystal chandeliers, a jazz trio murmuring in the background. The guest list was a careful mix of donors, politicians, and business partners. It was also the first time in 5 years my entire family had been in the same room. I arrived alone, no +1. That detail mattered more than I realized at the time. My mother Elaine greeted me with a kiss that stopped just short of warmth. "Claire, you made it," she said, already scanning the room over my shoulder. My father, Robert, nodded from across the table, like I was an employee who had arrived on time. Madeline arrived 20 minutes later in a red dress that demanded attention, and received it instantly. She hugged my parents, laughed loudly, and kissed 2 board members she'd met once at a barbecue. No one asked why she was unemployed at 30 and still living in my parents' guest house. Dinner passed in fragments. Polite questions, strategic compliments. I answered when spoken to, and listened when I wasn't. That's how I'd survived this family for years, by observing instead of engaging. About 40 minutes in, I noticed the seating chart. My name was printed on a card near the back of the room, next to a distant cousin I barely knew. Madeline sat at the head table, between my parents and their attorney, George Keller, a silver-haired man who smelled faintly of cedar and confidence. That should have been my first warning. After dessert, my father stood and tapped his glass. The room settled. Cameras lifted. This was the moment. The announcement portion of the evening. Donations, gratitude, legacy. "Tonight," Robert Holloway began, "Elaine and I want to share something personal. Something important for the future of our family and our company." I felt a tightening in my chest. Not fear, recognition. "We've spent 40 years building Holloway Maritime," he continued, "and it's time we ensured that what we've built is protected." My mother reached for his hand. Perfect timing, perfect optics. "With that in mind," he said, smiling toward Madeline, "we're proud to announce that our daughter Madeline will be stepping into a leadership role within the company." Applause erupted. I stayed still. "She'll be assuming the position of Vice President of Family Operations," my father added, "and effective immediately, she will be the primary beneficiary of the Holloway Family Trust." The room clapped louder. I didn't breathe. Primary beneficiary. That meant one thing, and only one thing. I wasn't. My mother didn't look at me. Not once. Madeline's eyes found mine across the table. There was surprise there, then relief, then something sharper. Satisfaction. I waited. Surely there would be more. Clarification. Balance. There wasn't. My father raised his glass. To legacy. Glasses clinked. Something inside me went quiet. I didn't leave right away. That's important. I stayed. I watched people congratulate my sister on a role she didn't understand in a company she'd never worked for. I watched my parents accept praise for a decision they hadn't discussed with me, hadn't warned me about, hadn't even acknowledged I might exist. When my mother finally approached me near the coat check, her voice was calm, controlled. "Claire," she said, "we'll talk later." "When?" I asked. She adjusted her pearl bracelet. "Not tonight." That was the answer. I drove home alone through downtown Savannah, the lights blurring at the edges of my vision. Not because I was crying, but because my hands were clenched so tightly around the steering wheel. I replayed every moment. The seating chart, the attorney, the phrasing. This wasn't impulsive. This was planned. And for the first time in my life, I let myself consider a thought I had avoided for decades. This wasn't favoritism. This was exclusion. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my phone buzzed. A text from my father. "We'll explain soon. Don't overreact." I stared at the screen. Soon had always meant never in my family. I went inside, locked the door, and sat at my kitchen table in the dark. Somewhere between midnight and morning, the shock hardened into something else. Resolve. Because if my family thought I would quietly accept being erased, they had misunderstood me completely. And they had just made the first move in a game they assumed I wasn't paying attention to. They were wrong. The explanation my father promised never came. Not the next morning, not the day after, not even when I stopped returning my mother's calls and let my phone ring until it fell silent on my kitchen counter. 3 days passed, then 5. On the 6th day, I received an email. Not from my parents, from George Keller, the family attorney. The subject line read, "Estate planning follow-up." No greeting, no warmth, just efficiency. I read it twice before I understood what it meant. The Holloway Family Trust had been amended 18 months earlier. Madeline Holloway was now listed as the sole successor trustee and majority beneficiary. My name appeared once, near the bottom, attached to a clause describing a discretionary distribution to be determined at the trustee's sole judgment. Madeline's judgment. I closed my laptop slowly and stared at my reflection in the dark screen. Calm, unblinking. That's what frightened me most. There was no panic, no disbelief, just a clean line connecting the past to the present. They hadn't excluded me on impulse. They had done it quietly, legally, and well in advance. The mini-hook came later that afternoon, when I realized something else. 18 months ago was the same month my grandmother died. Margaret Holloway had been the only person in that family who ever treated me like I mattered. She'd taught me how to balance a checkbook when I was 12. She'd driven 6 hours to attend my college graduation when my parents were busy. She used to say, "Claire sees things. That's her gift." Her will had been folded neatly into the family trust after her death. I'd never questioned it. Until now. That evening, I drove to my parents' house for the first time since the Gala. White brick, manicured hedges. The same place where I'd learned how to sit quietly and not ask for too much. Madeline's car was in the driveway. Of course it was. My mother, Elaine Holloway, opened the door with a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Claire, you should have called." "I did," I said. "You didn't answer." She stepped aside anyway. The house smelled like lemon cleaner and something sweet baking. Normal. Intentionally normal. My father, Robert Holloway, sat in his leather chair, newspaper folded, like he'd been waiting. Madeline lounged on the sofa, scrolling on her phone, legs tucked beneath her, like a child who belonged there. No one offered me a seat. "Why wasn't I told?" I asked, standing where I was. My father sighed, already tired. "This again." "This," I said, "is my life." Elaine crossed her arms. "Claire, we knew you'd take it personally." "Because it is personal." Madeline looked up, smirking. "It's business." I turned to her. "What experience do you have running a shipping company?" She shrugged. Dad will help. That answered more than she intended. My father cleared his throat. Madeline has the right temperament for this family. She understands loyalty. There it was. The word they always used when they meant obedience. And I don't, I said quietly. Elaine's eyes sharpened. You're independent to a fault. You don't need us. The sentence landed exactly where it was meant to. You didn't ask, I replied. We didn't need to, my father said. This was our decision. I nodded slowly. When was it made? Silence. Madeline shifted. My mother avoided my gaze. 18 months ago, I said. Right after Grandma died. Elaine flinched. She wanted this, my father said too quickly. Your grandmother trusted Madeline. That was the moment I knew they were lying. Margaret Holloway had once pulled me aside at Thanksgiving and whispered, "Promise me you'll never let them silence you." She'd pressed a manila envelope into my hand that night, told me to keep it safe. I had, unopened, out of respect. Until now. I'd like to see the trust documents, I said. George Keller's voice came from the hallway speaker before anyone could answer. I've already sent them to you, Claire. He stepped into the room, uninvited but expected. His presence explained everything. You amended the trust without notifying me, I said. You're not a beneficiary of record, he replied calmly. Notification wasn't required. Madeline smiled. I felt something shift inside my chest. Not anger. Alignment. I want a copy of Grandma's original will, I said. George hesitated. Just a fraction. Enough. That won't be necessary, Elaine said. It will, I replied. Unless you have something to hide. The room went quiet. My father stood. This conversation is over. No, I said. This one is just beginning. I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope Margaret had given me years ago. The edges were worn now, the seal intact. Elaine's face drained of color. I never opened this, I said. But I will. Madeline stood abruptly. You're being dramatic. I looked at her. Really looked. The entitlement. The fear beneath it. I'm being precise, I said. I turned and walked out before anyone could stop me. I didn't open the envelope in the car. I waited until I was home, seated at my kitchen table, the same place I'd sat after the gala. Inside was a handwritten letter and a notarized addendum. Margaret Holloway's signature was clear and unmistakable. She had left her personal assets, including her voting shares in Holloway Maritime, to me, conditioned only on one thing, that I be informed. I exhaled slowly. They hadn't just excluded me. They had buried an inheritance that threatened everything. And now I understood why they'd acted so fast. Because if I stepped back into that family business with voting power, the balance would shift. And they knew it. I folded the papers carefully and placed them back in the envelope. Tomorrow, I would call a lawyer. But tonight, I allowed myself one thought, cold and steady. They thought the story was over. They had no idea it had just reached its turning point. The lawyer I called the next morning did not belong to my family's world. That was deliberate. Her name was Hannah Cole, and she ran a small but ruthless estate litigation firm out of Midtown Atlanta. The kind that specialized in untangling trusts that were never meant to be questioned. She didn't advertise. She didn't smile unnecessarily. She listened. I slid Margaret Holloway's envelope across her desk and said nothing. Hannah read the letter once, then again, then the notarized addendum. She didn't rush. She didn't comment. When she finally looked up, her eyes were sharp in a way I respected immediately. How long have they known about this? She asked. 18 months, I said. At least. And you were never informed? No. She leaned back. That's not an oversight. That's concealment. The word settled between us. She explained it calmly, clinically. If my grandmother's addendum had been properly executed and notarized, and if her assets had been folded into the family trust without honoring the addendum, then the trust amendment could be challenged. Not easily, not quickly, but legitimately. What would they lose? I asked. Hannah didn't hesitate. Control. That night, my phone started buzzing again. Madeline called first. I let it ring. Then my mother. Elaine Holloway never left voicemails. She believed silence was more powerful. My father followed with a text. We need to talk, privately. I replied with one sentence. I have counsel now. The typing bubble appeared, disappeared. appeared again. Nothing came through. The mini hook arrived the next afternoon, when Hannah called me back sooner than expected. "There's something else," she said. "I pulled the public filings for Holloway Maritime. Your sister's new title doesn't exist." "What do you mean?" "Vice President of Family Operations isn't a registered executive role. It's cosmetic. She has no fiduciary authority, no legal power. It's a placeholder, a role designed to look important without granting access." "They never intended to give her control," I said. "No," Hannah replied. "They intended to keep it." That changed everything. It meant Madeline wasn't the mastermind. She was the distraction. The real decisions were still being made by Robert and Elaine Holloway, and they were tightening the structure around themselves, quietly, before age or illness forced their hand. 3 days later, the invitation arrived. Thanksgiving dinner, the Holloway house, noon sharp, my mother's handwriting on the envelope. Neat, controlled, like nothing had happened. Hannah advised against going. I went anyway. Thanksgiving had always been my family's favorite performance. Silver place settings, assigned seating, conversations curated like a board meeting. I arrived early, on purpose. My Aunt Patricia Holloway, my father's sister, was already there, arranging flowers. She looked surprised to see me. "Claire," she said softly, "I didn't know you were coming." Neither did they. My parents were in the kitchen. My father stiffened when he saw me. My mother's smile froze and recalibrated. "Happy Thanksgiving," I said. Elaine recovered first. "I'm glad you came. We've all missed you." It was a lie, but a familiar one. Madeline arrived late, as usual, carrying a store-bought pie and a practiced grin. She avoided my eyes. Dinner began with grace, literally. My father thanked God for abundance, family, and unity. The words tasted hollow. Conversation flowed around me, not to me. Real estate prices, church renovations, Madeline's role at the company. "She's really stepping up," Elaine said, touching my sister's arm. "Learning so much." I took a sip of water, counted my breaths. Halfway through the meal, my father cleared his throat. "Claire," he said, finally addressing me, "we should resolve this misunderstanding." A misunderstanding. That was the frame. "I agree," I said. "We should." Elaine set down her fork. "Your grandmother's wishes were considered." "They were ignored," I replied calmly. Silence spread across the table. Madeline laughed nervously. "Can we not do this today?" "This is the day you chose," I said, meeting my mother's eyes. My father leaned forward. "The trust was amended, legally, without disclosure," I said. "That matters." Patricia shifted uncomfortably. "Robert." He cut her off with a glance. "You've always been difficult," Elaine said. "You question everything." "Yes," I said. "That's why I'm here." I placed a folder on the table. Inside were copies of Margaret Holloway's letter and addendum. My aunt gasped quietly. "This," I said, "gives me voting shares." My father's face went tight. "That document is outdated," he said. "It's notarized," I replied, "and concealed." Madeline stood abruptly. "You're trying to steal from us." I looked at her. Really looked. "No," I said. "I'm reclaiming what was hidden." Elaine's voice dropped. "If you pursue this, you will destroy this family." The sentence landed like a threat, not a plea. "I didn't do that," I said. "You did." My father pushed his chair back. "This ends now." "Not today," I replied. I stood, gathered my folder, and turned toward the door. Behind me, Elaine spoke, her voice sharp with something new. "If you walk out that door, don't expect to be welcomed back." I paused. Just long enough. I wasn't welcome when I walked in. I left to the sound of cutlery clinking nervously against porcelain. Outside, the air was cold and clean. I sat in my car and let the stillness settle. My phone buzzed. A text from Hannah. "They filed a Second Amendment this morning. Emergency clause. You need to see this." I closed my eyes. They weren't backing down. They were escalating. And for the first time, I understood the shape of what was coming. This wasn't about inheritance anymore. This was about erasure, and I was done allowing it. The emergency amendment was designed to look boring. That was the first thing Hannah Cole said when I met her an hour later in her office. A legal pad already filled with tight handwriting. "They didn't change much," she said, which is exactly the point. She slid the document across the desk. The language was dense, careful, intentionally dull. At a glance, it looked like a routine administrative update. Trustee clarification, succession continuity, operational stability. I read it twice, then the third time. They removed me completely, I said. Hannah nodded. Not just as a beneficiary, as a potential challenger. The amendment included a clause stating that any party contesting the trust would forfeit all discretionary consideration permanently. A legal muzzle, retroactive in intent, if not in language. They're daring you to blink, Hannah said, and hoping you don't understand what they're doing. I did understand. They weren't trying to win in court yet. They were trying to scare me into silence. Can they do this? I asked. Not if the original concealment is proven, she replied. But they're building pressure, financial, emotional, time-based. As if on cue, my phone buzzed. An email from HR at my firm. Subject: mandatory disclosure review. My pulse stayed steady. That surprised me. The body of the email was polite, neutral. It referenced an anonymous tip expressing concern about a potential conflict of interest related to my family's shipping business and my role in freight insurance compliance. I exhaled slowly. They're coming after my job, I said. Hannah didn't look surprised. Of course they are. It's leverage. The mini-hook arrived when she added, and it tells me something important. What? They're scared. I drove back to Atlanta that evening under a gray sky, the kind that flattened the city into lines and glass. I'd built my career deliberately, one certification, one audit, one clean decision at a time. I'd never once used my family's name for advantage. Now it was being weaponized against me. The HR meeting was scheduled for Friday at 9 a.m. I didn't sleep much Thursday night, but not from anxiety, from preparation. I pulled my employment contracts, my compliance disclosures, every ethics filing I'd ever submitted. Dates, signatures, receipts. By the time I walked into the conference room Friday morning, I knew exactly where I stood. 2 HR representatives sat across from me. 1 legal counsel. Neutral faces. Neutral language. Claire, the senior rep began, we've received a concern regarding potential undisclosed conflicts of interest. I anticipated that, I said, and I've prepared documentation. I slid a folder across the table. They flipped through it silently. I've disclosed my family's business in every required filing since my hire, I continued. I've never worked on a policy connected to Holloway Maritime. I've recused myself whenever necessary. The legal counsel nodded. That appears to be accurate. The meeting ended in 23 minutes. As I walked out, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was Madeline, I answered. Are you happy now? She asked. No greeting, no warmth. About what? I said. You're tearing everything apart. No, I replied. I'm revealing what was already broken. She laughed, sharp and brittle. You think this ends well for you? I think it ends honestly, I said. She hung up. That evening, Hannah called again. We've identified the weak point, she said. Your parents filed the emergency amendment without independent witness verification. It's vulnerable. When do we act? Soon, she said, but not yet. The pressure didn't stop. 2 days later, my bank called about a delayed mortgage payment that had already cleared. A clerical error, they said. It resolved quickly. Then my credit monitoring service flagged a soft inquiry from a private financial firm I'd never contacted. Patterns. They're probing, Hannah said when I told her. Trying to see where you're exposed. I wasn't. That was the problem. I'd built a life that didn't rely on them. They couldn't pull the rug out from under me, so they changed tactics. The call came from my Aunt Patricia. Claire, she said, voice tight. Your mother's been unwell. I paused. How unwell? She fainted at church. The doctor says it's stress. Of course it was. They're blaming you, Patricia added quietly. I know. She keeps saying if you would just stop, everything could go back to normal. Normal. The word tasted bitter. I'm sorry, Patricia said. I didn't know. About your grandmother's letter. Neither did they want you to, I replied. Silence stretched between us. There's going to be a family meeting, she said finally. Christmas Eve. They want to clear the air. I almost laughed. A meeting. In a house that had never listened. I'll be there, I said. After I hung up, Hannah called within minutes. They scheduled a Christmas Eve meeting, I told her. She sighed. Of course they did. What do I do? Exactly what you've been doing, she said. Observe. Document. don't concede. That night, alone in my apartment, I poured a glass of water and sat at my kitchen table. I thought about the girl I'd been, the one who tried harder, spoke softer, believed that loyalty would eventually be returned. That girl was gone. In her place was someone steadier, someone who understood leverage. Christmas Eve was in 10 days, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that my parents weren't inviting me to reconcile. They were inviting me to fold. They had underestimated one thing. I no longer needed their approval, and I was done being afraid of what they might take. Because there was nothing left they hadn't already tried to strip away, the only thing still untouched was the truth, and I was about to bring it into the room. By the time Christmas Eve arrived, the house already felt like a courtroom. Not because anything had been said yet, but because everyone had chosen a side before a single word was spoken. I arrived 10 minutes early, again, on purpose. Snow hadn't reached Savannah that year, but the air was sharp and dry, the kind that made every sound carry farther than it should. The Holloway house glowed from the inside, windows warm and inviting, like a promise it never intended to keep. Elaine Holloway opened the door herself. She looked smaller than she had at Thanksgiving, paler, fragile if you didn't know her. The cardigan she wore was soft gray, deliberately understated. No pearls tonight. "Claire," she said, exhaling like she'd been holding her breath. "You came. You invited me," I replied. She stepped aside without touching me. The living room was already full. My father, Robert Holloway, stood near the fireplace, hands clasped behind his back, like a general waiting for a report. Madeline Holloway sat on the couch, legs crossed, scrolling through her phone. Aunt Patricia hovered near the window. Uncle James, my mother's older brother, sat stiffly in an armchair, eyes fixed on the tree. George Keller, the attorney, was there too. That was the tell. I took in the scene quietly, counted bodies, measured distances. No one offered me a drink. No one offered me a seat. Elaine gestured toward the center of the room. "Let's all sit. We need to talk as a family." I sat when everyone else did. Not before. My father cleared his throat. "This isn't easy." "It rarely is when you've been lying," I said calmly. Madeline groaned. "Can you not start like that?" "I didn't start this," I replied. Elaine raised a trembling hand. "Please. I'm not well, Claire." I watched her carefully. The timing, the phrasing, the performance. "You're stressed," I said. "That's not the same thing." Her eyes hardened for half a second, before softening again. George Keller leaned forward. "Claire, we're here to propose a resolution." I waited. "Your parents are willing to offer you a settlement," he continued. "A one-time distribution from the trust. Generous. In exchange for your agreement not to contest any existing or future amendments." There it was. The payoff. "How much?" I asked. Madeline sat up. "That's not the point." "It is," I said. George hesitated. $400,000. The number hung in the air. A life-changing amount. For some. Elaine reached for my hand. I let her touch me this time. Her fingers were cold. "We want you to be secure," she said softly. "You've always wanted independence. This gives you that." I withdrew my hand gently. "I already have independence," I said. "What you're offering is silence." Robert's jaw tightened. "You're being unreasonable." "No," I replied. "I'm being accurate." The mini-hook came when I added, "And I know why you're rushing." The room stilled. "You're afraid of discovery," I continued. "Not litigation. Exposure." George shifted. Madeline's smile faltered. "Claire," Elaine said sharply, "you're imagining things." "I'm not," I said. "I've read the filings. I've spoken to counsel. And I've spoken to the bank Grandma used." My father's face changed. "Just a fraction." "Enough. You folded her personal assets into the trust without honoring her addendum," I said. "That's not just unethical. It's actionable." Uncle James looked up sharply. "What addendum?" Elaine turned to him too quickly. Margaret was confused near the end. "She wasn't," I said, "and you know it." Silence thickened. Madeline stood. "You're destroying Mom." I met her gaze. "No. I'm refusing to be destroyed for her comfort." Elaine's voice dropped. "If you proceed, we will cut you off completely." The threat was almost laughable. "You already did," I said. I stood then, slowly, deliberately. "I'm not here to negotiate my erasure," I said. "I'm here to inform you." George stiffened. "Inform us of what?" I pulled a second folder from my bag and placed it on the coffee table. Inside were copies of correspondence, bank records, a preliminary opinion letter from Hannah Cole's firm. "You have 90 days, I said, "to restore the trust in accordance with Margaret Holloway's notarized addendum, or this moves forward publicly." Robert stood abruptly. "You wouldn't." "I will," I said, "and I won't enjoy it." Elaine's composure cracked. "After everything we've done for you," I looked at her. Really looked. "You taught me to survive without you," I said. "This is the result." I walked toward the door. Behind me, George spoke, his voice tight. "If you do this, there will be consequences." I paused with my hand on the knob. "Yes," I said, "there will." Outside, the air burned my lungs. I stood on the porch longer than necessary, letting the cold anchor me. My phone buzzed. A text from Hannah. "They just filed a quiet loan application against the trust assets. Collateralized. High risk." I closed my eyes. They weren't just protecting control anymore. They were bleeding the future dry. And now I understood the urgency. This wasn't a family dispute. It was a countdown. And if I didn't act soon, there would be nothing left to recover. I started my car, hands steady. Christmas Eve ended without gifts, without reconciliation, without forgiveness. But it ended with clarity. And clarity, I was learning, was more powerful than any inheritance. Because once you see the truth, you can't be bribed back into blindness. And they were running out of time. The loan changed everything, not because it surprised me, but because it confirmed the one thing Hannah and I had been circling without naming out loud. My parents weren't just trying to control the future, they were trying to cash it out before anyone could stop them. The morning after Christmas Eve, Hannah Cole called me before I'd finished my coffee. "They used the trust as collateral," she said. "A private lender. Short-term, aggressive interest." "How aggressive?" I asked. "Enough that if the loan defaults, the lender gets first claim on trust-controlled assets." The words settled slowly. Holloway Maritime. The properties. The legacy my parents liked to toast to at charity dinners. All of it, suddenly, fragile. "And the timing?" I asked. "The paperwork was filed the same week your grandmother's addendum would have become enforceable if disclosed." I closed my eyes. "They knew," I said. "They always knew." "Yes," Hannah replied. And they panicked. The mini-hook came when she added, "which means they made mistakes." The lender was called Meridian Crest Capital. Not a bank, a boutique financial firm that specialized in high-risk bridge loans for family-owned businesses in distress. Perfectly legal, perfectly predatory. I spent the rest of the day doing what I'd always done best: research. I pulled public filings, cross-referenced loan structures, read court cases involving Meridian Crest until the pattern emerged. They didn't like scrutiny. They liked fast deals and quiet borrowers. And they hated litigation. That night, my father called. I let it ring twice before answering. "Claire," Robert Holloway said. His voice was tired now, not angry, not commanding, just worn thin. "We need to talk." "We've been talking," I said. "You just haven't been listening." "This has gone too far," he said. "You're threatening the stability of the company." "You did that," I replied, "when you chose secrecy over honesty." A pause. "Madeline's taking this hard," he added. I almost smiled. "She always does when consequences appear," I said. "That's enough," he snapped. "No," I replied evenly. "It's exactly enough." He lowered his voice. "What do you want?" The question was revealing. Not what's fair, not what's right. What will make you stop? "I want the trust restored," I said. "And I want transparency." "That's not possible," he said immediately. "Then prepare for discovery," I replied. He hung up without another word. 2 days later, Hannah filed a formal notice of intent to contest the trust. Not a lawsuit. Yet. A warning shot. It triggered something I hadn't anticipated. My mother showed up at my apartment, unannounced. I opened the door and found Elaine Holloway standing in the hallway. Coat buttoned too tightly, hair pulled back like she was bracing for impact. "May I come in?" she asked. I considered it, then stepped aside. She sat at my kitchen table, hands folded, eyes scanning the room. The quiet, the simplicity, the absence of family photos. "You live very alone," she said. "I live very peacefully," I replied. She sighed. You always make things difficult. And you always pretend that's a flaw, I said. Her eyes flicked up, sharp, then softened again. Claire, she said, we were trying to protect you. I didn't laugh. I didn't argue. I waited. You wouldn't survive in that business, she continued. The pressure, the politics. Madeline needs us. And I didn't? I asked. She looked away. There are things you don't understand, she said. I understand enough, I replied. You didn't trust me with power, so you tried to buy my silence. She leaned forward. If you continue, this will destroy your father. I met her gaze steadily. He's destroying himself, I said. I just stopped covering for him. Her composure cracked then. Not dramatically, just enough. You think you're better than us, she said quietly. No, I replied. I think I'm done being smaller for you. She stood abruptly. You'll regret this. Maybe, I said, but I won't regret telling the truth. She left without another word. That evening, Hannah called again. They responded, she said. Not legally, personally. How so? Your mother called my office, she replied. Asked if I'd reconsider representing you. I closed my eyes. What did you say? That I don't abandon clients under pressure, Hannah said, and that if she contacts me again, I'll add harassment to the filing. I exhaled slowly. The escalation was becoming sloppy, which meant they were running out of moves. 3 days later, Meridian Crest Capital reached out, not to my parents, to me. An email. Polite. Curious. Subject. Inquiry regarding beneficial interests. I forwarded it to Hannah immediately. Her response came fast. They're nervous, she said. They want to know if you're a threat. What do we tell them? We tell them the truth, she replied. That there's a contested interest tied to undisclosed assets. That was all it took. Meridian Crest froze the second tranche of the loan. The interest rate adjusted upward automatically. Penalties kicked in. The clock started ticking louder. That night, Madeline called again. This time, she was crying. They're going to lose everything, she said. Why are you doing this to us? To you? I asked. To the family, she snapped. I pictured her at the head of the gala table. The applause. The title that meant nothing. You were never meant to carry this, I said softly. And they knew it. She went quiet. They promised me, she whispered. I know, I said. They promised you a fantasy. She hung up without saying goodbye. By the end of the week, my parents' attorney requested a private mediation. Neutral location. No witnesses. No theatrics. Hannah smiled when she told me. They're bleeding, she said, and they're afraid of daylight. I nodded. Good, I said. Let's bring the lights on. Because at this point, it wasn't about revenge. It was about ending a pattern. And patterns only break when someone refuses to play their assigned role. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the difficult daughter. I was the variable they hadn't accounted for. And the system they'd built to exclude me was about to collapse under its own weight. The mediation was scheduled for January 14th at a private office park outside Macon, the kind of place designed to feel neutral and forgettable. Beige walls, frosted glass, no windows facing the street. Control through environment. Hannah Cole met me in the parking lot 10 minutes early. She wore a charcoal suit and the expression she saved for people who thought they were smarter than they were. They'll try to rush you, she said as we walked. They'll frame this as mercy. I won't mistake it for that, I replied. Inside, my parents were already seated. Robert Holloway sat stiffly at the conference table, hands folded, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. Elaine Holloway sat beside him, posture perfect, face carefully composed. George Keller occupied the chair across from Hannah, legal pad open, pen aligned precisely at the top. Madeline Holloway wasn't there. That was deliberate, too. Elaine smiled when she saw me, not warmly, strategically. Claire, she said, thank you for coming. I took my seat without responding. The mediator, a former probate judge named William Hensley, cleared his throat and began with the usual language. Neutrality, confidentiality, mutual resolution. I listened. So did Hannah. When he finished, George spoke first. My clients are prepared to offer a revised settlement, he said. More equitable. Elaine placed a folder on the table and slid it toward me. 800,000, she said softly, and a clean separation. I didn't open it. And in exchange, I asked? Robert leaned forward. You withdraw all challenges. You sign a non-disclosure agreement. You walk away. Walk away. From what was already mine. And the trust, I asked? Elaine's lips tightened. Remains intact. Meaning unchanged. Meaning concealed. I glanced at Hannah. She gave a slight nod. My grandmother's voting shares, I said. Restored. George interjected. That's not feasible. Then neither is this, I said, pushing the folder back untouched. Elaine exhaled sharply. Why are you doing this? I met her gaze steadily. Because you lied, I said. Because you excluded me quietly and expected me to accept it politely. And because you're still doing it. Robert's voice rose. You're risking everything we built. No, I replied. I'm refusing to let you destroy it without accountability. The mini hook arrived when Hannah slid her own folder onto the table. Inside were preliminary findings. Trust concealment analysis. Loan exposure summary. Correspondence with Meridian Crest Capital. George's pen stilled. What is this? Elaine asked. Discovery, Hannah said calmly. Preliminary. Robert's face drained of color. This mediation ends today, he said abruptly. No, Judge Hensley replied. It doesn't. Silence followed. Elaine's composure cracked first. You were never meant to be part of this, she said, her voice sharp now. You don't understand what it takes to run that family. I didn't respond immediately. When I did, my voice was level. You mean obedience, she flinched. You mean silence. Robert stood. Enough. Sit down, Judge Hensley said. He did. The air in the room shifted. The authority changed hands. Hannah leaned forward. Here's what will happen next if this doesn't resolve. We file. We subpoena bank records. We depose trustees. Meridian Crest accelerates the loan. The trust assets become public record. Elaine's eyes widened. You wouldn't dare. Hannah smiled faintly. We already have. I felt something settle in my chest. Not triumph. Certainty. George spoke carefully. What exactly are you asking for? I answered. Full restoration of my grandmother's addendum. Voting shares transferred to me. Independent trustee oversight. An immediate disclosure of all liabilities tied to the trust. Elaine laughed bitterly. You want to dismantle us. I want transparency, I replied. If that dismantles you, that's not my doing. Robert rubbed his face with both hands. He looked older than I'd ever seen him. We don't have time for this, he muttered. Hannah caught that. Why not? She asked. Elaine closed her eyes. Because Meridian Crest had issued a notice of conditional default that morning, they didn't say it out loud. They didn't have to. Judge Hensley cleared his throat. I suggest a recess. We stepped into separate rooms. Hannah closed the door behind us and leaned against it. They're cornered, she said quietly. The loan is killing them. What happens if they default? I asked. The lender takes control of trust-backed assets, she replied, including operational authority. I nodded. So they lose the company, I said. Yes. And Madeline? I asked. Hannah's expression softened slightly. Collateral damage. 10 minutes later, we were called back. Elaine's eyes were red. Robert looked hollow. George spoke. They'll restore the addendum, he said. Partial voting rights. Conditional oversight. Full, Hannah replied. George hesitated. Full. Elaine stared at me. This will break your father, she said. I met her gaze. You already did, I said. You just blamed me for it. The agreement was drafted in silence. No hugs. No reconciliation. Just signatures. When it was done, Judge Hensley nodded. This mediation is concluded. We stood. Elaine didn't look at me as I walked past her. Outside, the winter air felt sharp and clean. Hannah smiled for the first time. You just became a stakeholder, she said. I nodded. But something told me this wasn't over. Because control, once threatened, doesn't disappear quietly. And my parents hadn't made their final move yet. They had only lost the board. The retaliation would be personal. And I was ready. Power doesn't leave quietly. It lingers, looks for cracks, waits for moments of distraction. And my parents had spent decades perfecting the art of delayed retaliation. The first sign came a week after the mediation. Not a call, not a threat, an email. It arrived from the board of Holloway Maritime Logistics, formally notifying me of an upcoming emergency shareholders meeting. The tone was professional, neutral, almost respectful. The agenda, however, was anything but. Proposed leadership restructuring. Executive misconduct review. Operational continuity vote. I forwarded it to Hannah immediately. They're reframing, she said after reading it. They lost the trust, so now they're going after reputation. Mine or theirs, I asked. She didn't hesitate. Yours. The meeting was scheduled for January 29th. Savannah, company headquarters, my parents' territory. In the days leading up to it, the whispers started. A former colleague texted me late one night. Just checking in, heard some things. A vendor I hadn't spoken to in years emailed, asking whether it was true I'd been blocked from internal access due to a compliance concern. Then HR from Holloway Maritime requested a statement. I ignored it. Hannah didn't. They're attempting a character assassination, she said calmly. Classic maneuver. If they can't remove your rights, they'll poison your standing. And if they succeed, then you still win legally, she replied. But it costs you something else. I understood. They weren't trying to beat me in court anymore. They were trying to isolate me. The mini hook came when Hannah added, but they've underestimated one thing. What's that? You don't work there. I smiled faintly. My career wasn't tied to their company. My reputation wasn't built in their hallways. I'd spent years deliberately distancing myself from their influence. They were swinging at a shadow. Still, the meeting mattered because perception has weight, and they knew how to shape it. The night before the shareholders' meeting, Madeline called. Her voice sounded different, flat, tired. They're blaming me, she said. For what? I asked. For trusting you, she replied bitterly. For not stopping you. I said nothing. They told the board I'm not ready, she continued. That the loan situation made things unstable. That my position might be temporary. I exhaled slowly. So the crown was conditional, I said. She laughed without humor. You always knew. Yes, I replied. I did. There was a long pause. I didn't want this to happen, she said finally. I know, I said. But you let it. She hung up without another word. The headquarters building hadn't changed. Same brick exterior. Same polished lobby. Same framed photos of ships and handshakes lining the walls. My father's vision, captured and curated. I arrived with Hannah at my side. The boardroom was already full. 11 directors, some familiar, some new, all carefully neutral. My parents sat together at one end of the table. They didn't look at me. George Keller stood to begin. Thank you all for attending on short notice, he said. Recent developments require immediate attention. He spoke for 10 minutes. About instability, about risk, about distraction, about me, not by name. Not directly, just enough. When he finished, my father stood. Recent actions taken by certain family members, he said, have introduced unnecessary volatility into the company's governance. There it was. I waited until he finished. Then I stood. I'd like to respond, I said. A murmur rippled through the room. The chair hesitated, then nodded. You may. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I didn't defend myself emotionally. I presented facts. The trust concealment has been legally resolved, I said. The loan against trust assets was undisclosed to shareholders and triggered lender intervention. That risk did not originate with me. I glanced down the table. Several directors shifted uncomfortably. I have never worked for Holloway Maritime, I continued. I have no operational role, no access, no incentive to disrupt performance. What I do have is a fiduciary interest in transparency, George interrupted. This is not the forum. It is, I replied evenly. Because perception is being shaped here, and I won't allow silence to be mistaken for guilt. The chair raised a hand. George sat. I've submitted documentation to the board, I said, including the restored addendum, loan exposure timeline, and correspondence with Meridian Crest Capital. I paused. And I want the record to reflect that the emergency loan was executed without full board disclosure. The room went very still. One of the directors, a man named Charles Bennett, leaned forward. Is that accurate? He asked my father. Robert Holloway didn't answer immediately. That was the answer. The vote that followed wasn't dramatic. No shouting. No collapse, just numbers. The board voted to suspend any leadership restructuring pending an independent audit. The motion passed. Madeline's role was frozen. My parents' authority was contained, not removed, contained. Outside, Hannah exhaled slowly. They wanted to corner you, she said. Instead, they exposed themselves. I nodded. But I felt no victory, because I knew something they didn't. People who lose control in public rarely accept it in private. And as we walked to the car, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. You think this is over. It isn't. I deleted it without replying. Because at this point, the threats were empty. The damage was done. And the last thing my parents had left was the illusion that they could still hurt me. That illusion wouldn't survive what came next. Because the audit was about to begin. And audits don't care about family. They care about truth. Audits move slowly, on the surface. Behind closed doors, they move like a blade. The independent audit firm was brought in under the board's authority, not my parents'. That detail mattered more than anyone admitted out loud. It meant the questions would not be polite. It meant explanations would not be accepted at face value. For the first 2 weeks, nothing happened publicly. No statements, no headlines, no visible fallout. My parents leaned into that silence like it was a shield. Elaine continued attending church. Robert still went into the office every morning. Madeline posted curated photos online, smiling beside captions about resilience and family. The illusion held. Until it didn't. The first call came from Hannah, late on a Tuesday evening. They've requested expanded scope, she said. I didn't ask who. I already knew. What did they find? I asked. Enough inconsistencies to justify digging deeper, she replied. Related party transactions, deferred disclosures, internal transfers that don't line up with board approvals. I closed my eyes. That's not sloppiness, I said. No, Hannah agreed. That's strategy. The mini hook came when she added, and strategy leaves a paper trail. By the end of the week, the board requested interim findings. By the end of the next, Meridian Crest Capital formally issued a notice of default. The loan clock ran out. My parents didn't call me. They didn't threaten. They didn't plead. They went quiet. Silence is what people choose when they're losing. The first public crack appeared in the business press 3 days later. A short article, buried on page 4, carefully worded. Questions raised about governance practices at Holloway Maritime Logistics. No accusations, just curiosity. The market doesn't need proof to get nervous. It just needs doubt. My father showed up at my apartment that night, not my mother. Just him. Robert Holloway stood in my hallway, coat unbuttoned, eyes bloodshot, no script left to read from. Can we talk? He asked. I considered it, then stepped aside. He sat at the kitchen table, the same chair my mother had occupied weeks earlier. He didn't look around this time. He stared at his hands. They're circling, he said quietly. I know, I replied. You could stop this, he said. You could tell them to slow down. I didn't start it, I said, and I don't control it. That was the truth. He swallowed. Elaine doesn't understand what's happening. She understands control, I replied. She just lost it. His shoulders slumped. For 35 years, he said, I kept this company alive. And for 35 years, I replied, you confuse survival with entitlement. He looked up at me then. Really looked. You were always watching, he said. Yes, I replied, because I had to. The mini hook came when he asked, what do you want now? I didn't answer immediately, because for the first time, the question wasn't about leverage. It was about outcome. I want the truth documented, I said. And I want you to stop trying to outmaneuver consequences. He nodded slowly. They're going to force a vote, he said. Remove us. Yes, I replied. And Madeline? He asked. I held his gaze. She was never meant to carry your mistakes, I said. But she benefited from them. He flinched. I didn't raise you to be cruel, he said. No, I replied. You raised me to be precise. He left without another word. 2 days later, the board issued a statement. Robert Holloway would be stepping back from day-to-day operations, pending audit completion. Elaine Holloway would relinquish any informal advisory influence effective immediately. Madeline's position was officially dissolved. No ceremony, no apology, just removal. The family name still sat on the building, but the power behind it was gone. The audit report landed on a Friday morning. Hannah read it before I did. When she called, her voice was steady. They found enough to justify referral, she said. Civil, not criminal, but severe. Consequences? I asked. Fines. Forced restructuring. Loss of control. I nodded. That night my phone buzzed again. This time, it was Madeline. Her voice broke the moment she spoke. They took everything, she said. No, I replied. They took what wasn't protected by honesty. She cried quietly. I don't know who I am without them, she said. I closed my eyes. You'll have to find out, I said, the way I did. She hung up. By Sunday, the board announced a transition plan. New leadership, independent oversight. The Holloway family reduced to minority influence. The legacy had become a footnote. And still, it wasn't over, because the final reckoning doesn't come in boardrooms. It comes in private, when there's no audience left and no one to blame but yourself. I knew the moment was coming, because people who build their identity on control eventually demand one last confrontation. And my mother had not said her final word yet. My mother waited until the board made it official, until the audit was public, until the press cycle moved on, until the phone stopped ringing, and the house grew quiet enough that there was no one left to perform for. That was when she called. Elaine Holloway had always understood timing. She didn't waste emotion when there was still leverage on the table. She saved it for moments like this, when nothing else worked. I want to see you, she said. No greeting, no softness, just intent. Why? I asked. Because this can't end like this. I almost corrected her. Almost said it already had. Instead, I gave her a time and place. We met at a small cafe on the outskirts of Savannah. Not one she liked. Not one anyone we knew would stumble into. No chandeliers, no white tablecloths. Just scratched wood and quiet corners. She arrived early. Elaine sat with her back straight, hands folded around a cup she hadn't touched. No jewelry, no makeup. She looked older without her armor. You look well, she said when I sat down. So do you, I replied. It was a lie. But it cost me nothing. She didn't waste time. You humiliated us, she said. I told the truth, I replied. She shook her head slowly. You destroyed your father. I met her gaze. You did that the moment you decided control mattered more than honesty. Her lips tightened. You always think you're right, she said. I think I'm responsible, I replied. There's a difference. The mini hook came when she leaned forward and said, Do you know why I never trusted you? I waited. Because you see too much, she continued. You don't accept the story you're given. You look behind it. That's called awareness, I said. In this family, she replied, it's called dangerous. There it was. The confession. Stripped of polish. You were willing to lose everything rather than share it, I said. Yes, she replied. Immediately. No hesitation. No shame. That's who I am. I nodded slowly. That's why you lost, I said. Her eyes flashed. You think this is winning? I think this is ending, I replied. She exhaled sharply. What do you want from me? The question again. Always transactional. I want you to stop rewriting what happened, I said. No more calls. No more messages through relatives. No more attempts to frame yourself as the victim. She laughed softly. You can't control what I say. No, I replied. But I can control whether I'm available to hear it. Silence stretched between us. For the first time, she looked uncertain. You cut us out, she said. You walked away from your family. I didn't raise my voice. I walked away from manipulation, I said. Family was already gone. She stared at me like she was trying to memorize my face. You're cold, she said. No, I replied. I'm finished. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for her cup. She didn't drink. Do you forgive us? She asked. The question surprised me. Not because she asked it, because of when. Forgiveness to her was a shortcut. A way to soften consequences without changing behavior. I don't owe you forgiveness, I said. I owe myself honesty. She recoiled as if I'd struck her. You're cruel, she whispered. I leaned back in my chair. Cruel would have been letting you continue, I said. This is restraint. We sat there for a long moment, the cafe's low hum filling the space between us. Finally, she stood. This isn't over, she said, voice brittle. It is for me, I replied. She hesitated, then turned and walked out without looking back. I stayed seated long after she left. Not because I was shaken. Because I was lighter. That night, I received confirmation from Hannah. The restructuring was complete. The trust was stabilized. The oversight committee installed. My voting shares secured, documented, protected. The system that had tried to erase me no longer had the power to do so. The retaliation was finished. All that remained was aftermath. And aftermath is quieter than people expect. There were no celebrations, no speeches, no sense of triumph, just space. Space to sleep through the night without bracing for impact. Space to answer my phone without anticipating manipulation. Space to exist without being measured against someone else's comfort. I didn't hear from my parents again. Not that week. Not the next. Madeline sent one final message a month later. I'm moving out. I need to figure out who I am. I didn't reply. Not out of anger. Out of respect for the distance she finally needed. Because growth doesn't happen when someone else is still pulling the strings. By the time spring arrived, Savannah felt like a city I could visit without holding my breath. The family name still hung over buildings and donations and plaques, but it no longer defined me. I had outgrown it. And what surprised me most wasn't the loss. It was the calm. Because when control disappears, what remains is truth. And truth, once faced, doesn't need revenge to feel complete. It just needs boundaries. And I had finally learned how to keep them. Freedom doesn't announce itself. It arrives quietly, disguised as an ordinary morning where nothing goes wrong. I realized it on a Tuesday in early April, standing in my kitchen, coffee cooling in my hand, sunlight cutting across the counter. No messages, no urgent emails, no legal updates. No family crises disguised as concern, just silence. Not the heavy kind, the clean kind. Work continued. My role at the insurance firm expanded after an internal reorganization, and by mid-spring, I was overseeing compliance operations across 6 states instead of 4. 21 staff now reported to me. Budgets I signed off on carried 8 figures. No one mentioned my last name. That mattered more than any title. The board of Holloway Maritime didn't contact me directly. Communication came through formal channels only. Structured, professional, contained. Exactly as it should have been from the beginning. My parents' names still appeared on donor lists, but less frequently. Smaller amounts. Their influence had thinned. Power always does when it's forced into the light. One afternoon, Hannah invited me to lunch. Not to discuss strategy. Not to review documents. Just lunch. You look different, she said once we sat down. Lighter? I asked. Sharper, she replied. Like someone who doesn't flinch anymore. I considered that. I used to mistake vigilance for loyalty, I said. Now I know the difference. She smiled. Most people never learn it. The mini hook came later that week, when a letter arrived. Handwritten. Careful. Familiar. Madeline. I didn't open it right away. I let it sit on the counter for 2 days, before curiosity, not obligation, got the better of me. She wrote about moving into a small apartment in Charleston, about working part-time at a nonprofit that helped women transition out of controlling households. About therapy. She didn't apologize. She didn't blame. She didn't ask for money or forgiveness. She just wrote, I'm learning what it means to exist without being chosen for someone else's benefit. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. Not because it healed anything, because it marked a boundary I no longer needed to defend. My father tried once. A voicemail, left late at night. I hope you're well, he said. Your mother's struggling. I deleted it without listening twice. That wasn't cruelty. That was consistency. Because I had learned something critical over the past year. Access is earned, even for parents, especially for parents. Spring turned into summer. The audit fallout settled. The company stabilized under new leadership. The Holloway name became a brand instead of a throne. I moved, not far, just enough. A smaller place closer to work. Clean lines, neutral walls, nothing inherited, nothing heavy. I donated the few family heirlooms I'd kept out of habit, not out of anger. Out of clarity. They weren't mine. They had never been. One evening, sitting on my balcony, I caught myself thinking about my grandmother, Margaret Holloway's voice, steady and knowing. She had seen this coming. She had prepared me without telling me. And for the first time, I allowed myself to grieve her properly, not as a symbol, as a person who understood the cost of silence. The grief passed. Not completely, but enough. The last conversation I had about my family happened at a dinner with friends. Someone asked, casually, "Do you still talk to your parents?" I didn't flinch. "No," I said. "We're not in each other's lives." There was no follow-up question. That, too, felt like progress. The mini hook arrived when I realized something else. I wasn't telling the story anymore, not because it hurt, but because it no longer defined me. What defined me now were choices made without fear, boundaries kept without apology, and a sense of self that didn't require permission. I didn't rebuild what they took. I built something separate, something quieter, something that didn't collapse when someone withdrew approval. By the time the first anniversary of the gala arrived, I didn't remember the exact date until it passed. That was how I knew I'd moved on. Because the moment that once erased me no longer had the power to summon emotion on command. It had become context, not identity. There was only one thing left: closure. Not for them, for me. And that came unexpectedly in the final chapter, when I realized that revenge had never been the point. Agency had. And once you reclaim that, you don't need to watch anyone else fall. You just keep walking. The last piece didn't arrive with drama. No court summons, no angry messages, no public apology. It arrived as a quiet understanding that nothing else was required. I was sitting in my office late one evening, the building nearly empty, the city outside my window dimmed by rain. A budget review lay open on my desk, numbers neat and contained. The kind of order I'd learned to create for myself. My phone buzzed once. A notification from the county clerk's office. The Holloway Family Trust restructuring had been finalized and recorded. No further actions pending. I stared at the screen for a long moment. That was it. No strings left to pull. No levers hidden behind smiles. No emergency amendments waiting in the shadows. The system had closed. I didn't feel triumph. I felt stillness. I left the office, drove home slowly, and cooked dinner for myself. Simple food, no ceremony. I ate at the counter, not the table, music playing softly in the background. Later, I stood on my balcony and watched the city breathe. Cars passed, lights flickered. Lives continued without any awareness of the story that had once consumed mine. That was the point. My parents never reached out again. Neither did I. I heard updates occasionally through distance and time. My father retired earlier than planned. My mother withdrew from public life. Madeline stayed in Charleston, building something quiet and fragile that was finally hers. I didn't track them. I didn't need to. Because the absence of chaos had become proof enough that I'd made the right choice. People think revenge looks like spectacle. It doesn't. It looks like detachment. It looks like waking up without bracing yourself. It looks like choosing not to explain yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. I didn't punish my family. I outgrew them. And that is the kind of payback no one can argue with. Before I end this, pause with me for a moment. If you've ever been excluded, dismissed, or quietly erased by the people who were supposed to protect you, I want you to know this. You're not imagining it. You're not overreacting. You're responding to truth. Family drama doesn't always end with reconciliation. Sometimes it ends with clarity. Sometimes the most powerful form of revenge is refusing to play the role that was designed to keep you small. If this story resonated with you, take a second to like and subscribe. It helps stories like this reach the people who need them most. And if you've ever had to choose yourself over family, leave a comment. Not for validation, for connection. Because healing isn't loud. It's steady, it's quiet, and it lasts. I'm Claire Holloway. I didn't win by taking something back. I won by walking away with myself intact. And that, finally, was enough.